Hello, my name is Hal, and I'm here again with my friend and fellow Vedanta student, Bede. As you probably know, if you've been watching this series of videos, Bede has a background in Western psychology. We're both students of traditional Vedanta, and we've been doing a series of videos on the psychology of Vedanta. This is video number 10 in a series. Bede, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, what I want to go over today is a favourite subject of mine due to my background, and what it deals with is what is the practice, if you like, necessary to transform us as an individual living in the world, to transform basically our emotional life. As individuals living in this world, so that we have a quality of mind that will enable us to understand the teaching.
Okay, well, that sounds interesting.
Okay, now the one thing that I want to deal with here is that we hear an extraordinary subject, don't we? We hear an extraordinary statement at the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, which is that there is no reason for grief.
Yes, no reason for grief. That's near the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, and also it's one of the last substantive, maybe the last substantive verse of the Bhagavad Gita is "Do not grieve."
Well, yeah, not as an instruction, but there is no reason for grief.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah.
Now, the thing is that when we look at our life, have you noticed that often we feel we have a reason to be upset?
Yes, we often do have reasons to be upset, or we think we have reasons to be upset.
Yes. So the experience of having reasons to be upset is pretty much all over the place.
Yeah, it seems like many of us, most of us, a lot of the time are upset, and we think for good reason.
Okay. Now, what I want to do is I just want to go over with you a very important topic, is that in order to practice karma yoga in the way that we understand it, we have to give up justifying unhappiness.
Okay, that doesn't sound easy to do.
No, it's not, but it's a very, very important thing. So I want to go, you see, I had a very interesting talk to Swamiji, my teacher, a couple of days ago, and I talked about how we're all devoted, but she corrected me in the sense of a more formal way to put this. She said, what it is that we have a passion for objects, but devotion is actually directed towards something other. So they're both emotional.
Mm-hmm.
But we have in our life, we have a passion, or we have a strong liking for various people and things in order to make us happy and feel fulfilled.
Yes.
So we're in one sense captivated by anything that will protect us or make us feel secure and have a sense of well-being.
Right, yeah. We feel passionate about those things.
We do. Mm-hmm. We, in fact, build our life around making sure that we get those things and avoiding the things that will take that sort of thing away.
Yes.
So we are bound to these things. Our whole attention is bound to these objects.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Yes, and they're called binding desires because literally they bind us. Okay?
Okay.
Now,
yeah.
The thing is that what happens is that the practice of you see, when you find something extremely attractive, right? The only remedy for it is to find something better.
I see.
You see, we can't just simply, let's say, for example, if I really love you know, if I really love approval and I really love the idea of success, of me being a success and me having social approval, and I really love having status. Okay? Now, it doesn't matter what I say intellectually, religiously, or philosophically. That love, if you like, is going to determine the way I am in the world.
Yes. Okay, that's going to be a motivating force that's going to determine your actions in the world.
Yes, because I believe my happiness is going to be, and security is found in that.
Right. And so what you're saying, though, is that you can't just sort of give that up, seeing the limitations in it?
No, you can't. You actually, the only thing that you can, if you discover happiness, if you discover a sense of well-being and happiness that is not in objects,
Mm-hmm.
you will be able to let go of those objects simply because you found something better.
I see. Okay. So you're saying that there has to be a substitute. You're not going to be able to just give up these desires for the things that you think will make you happy unless you find something better.
It's absolutely impossible.
Okay.
Psychodynamically, it is completely impossible because we cannot help but our whole psychology, our whole personality is arranged around seeking objects other than ourselves for our happiness.
You're the one trained in psychology, but I think I remember somewhere along the line reading that Sigmund Freud said you are going to remain attached to a libidinal object until one finds a substitute for it.
That's probably true.
Something like this in a way. I mean, although we wouldn't use the word libidinal, but no, we would say that you're not going to really be able to give up your attachment for an object or for any object unless you find something that's more satisfying.
Quite.
Okay.
And what we're talking about is we need to be able to, because you see, and we're not talking about shifting from one object to another because it's just another object. It's still this passion for objects.
Right.
Now, what frees us in Vedanta is devotion. What happens is that what's necessary is that we have to be able to discover a sense of well-being and happiness that doesn't come from objects.
Okay.
If we don't, we will remain the same psychologically.
I see. We'll be bound by our attachment and our desire for objects, and that desire, the desire for objects, is never going to be fully satisfying because, as we know, objects don't really hold happiness, and they don't last. They don't provide security, and so forth.
Right. So while we have a passion for objects, right, it's no real change is possible for us.
No change in terms of always feeling kind of frustrated, you mean?
Always. We're like on the Titanic, shifting the chairs around.
Right. Yeah.
Nothing can possibly happen. Mm-hmm. Until we understand, we find a source of happiness and well-being that does not belong to objects as such.
Right.
That's the first thing. Now, this
actually, excuse me, but maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but don't we actually, in a sense, find that happiness and well-being never belong to objects as such?
Right.
Don't we find really that ultimately that happiness and well-being never belonged to objects?
Yes, that's right. But
we only thought they did.
But the experience is that happiness does.
Yeah.
But the reality is it's not true.
Okay.
Okay. Now, So when we're looking at karma yoga, here we are, we're bound by this insistent pressure to attain certain objects and to keep others away. They're called binding desires. And what happens is that what Swami Dayananda says, that unless these desires are neutralized, we cannot possibly understand Vedanta.
Okay, this is where we're getting into the subject of karma yoga. I think we touched on it just near the end of our last discussion. Yes. But today we're going to be really talking about this.
We are. Because, and we're going to go back a little bit. You see, what happens is that unless the unhappiness is relatively resolved, the desires are not neutralized.
Okay.
Because the desires are the unhappiness in another form. Now, let's say, for example, I need to be loved and approved of. And then you say to me, Bede, I think really you're a bit of an idiot. And I'm suddenly very upset.
Understandably.
Okay. It's understandable. And I could justify it, couldn't I? I am upset because Hal has hurt me.
Yes.
Now, while I have that understanding that I am upset because Hal has hurt me, I must by necessity think that you're the problem and try and deal with you.
Yeah.
And you see, but what's happened here is that the desire, the upset is the desire for approval. The desire for approval is taking the form of upset.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
So my unhappinesses always have as their basis a binding desire.
Well, we're sort of like caught in a kind of a loop, because in a certain way, our unhappiness always has a basis of binding desire. And the binding desires always have as a basis our sense of unhappiness, right?
Yes. Yes, because what happens is I'm unhappy, I have a desire to get rid of that unhappiness. I then find something that will do that. Does that make sense? And then you come along and you shake it. And I'm thrown back into my unhappiness. Right. So it's only by the resolution of the unhappiness can the binding desire be neutralized.
Right. Otherwise, we are basically going around in circles, which is what the meaning of samsara is, right?
Yes.
We're caught in a circle of feeling unhappy and looking for something to change that, and then not being able to find it, or not find one that is ultimately satisfying, and then we're more unhappy, and then we keep looking, and we never get out of that kind of hamster wheel sort of situation, unless what, Bede?
Well, unless we can actually resolve the unhappiness and discover happiness.
That is not in objects, right?
That's not in objects. That's
okay.
Right. Because you see, so what happens is the training ground of karma yoga, if you like, is any form of unhappiness.
Mm-hmm.
So as I go along my life, have you noticed that as we go along in human life, we are continually being shaken with unhappiness?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're walking down the road. Have you ever, someone's been walking down the road and you just find yourself a little bit just not happy, just a little bit kind of maybe bored, or just a bit irritated, or a bit off? Have you ever had that experience?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Have you ever had the experience of feeling enmity towards other people?
Yeah, sure.
And of course, the enmity is always well-deserved, agreed?
One thinks so at the time, yeah.
We justify the unhappiness.
Right.
We've got all these reasons why it is that we are unhappy. Do you see now? Do you remember when we were talking about Ishvara? And we're talking about Vedanta Psychology about 3 or 4 talks back.
And we're talking about Ishwara, yeah.
Yeah, we're talking about reality, the presence of reality. That when the presence of reality comes into my mind and takes up all the room, I disappear as an unhappy person.
Right.
Now, this is a very, very important point. Because you see, according to Swami Dayananda, we as an individual, we're disconnected and cut off from the whole. This is our fundamental problem. We're in a state of alienation and disconnection from the whole. And what he says is this is called living in our world.
Living in our own little personal world, you mean?
Yes, our little world of...
I'm sorry, living in our subjective little world, right?
Yes, we're actually living in subjectivity.
Right.
Now, it's extremely important to understand that, and living in subjectivity means being disconnected from reality. In other words, the presence of reality is not in our life. That is our problem.
Yeah, there's not the presence of any objective reality isn't really there, or it's very little there, because it's all filtered through a very subjective way of looking at things.
Yes. Now, what's important about this is this. Once we understand that all the forms of unhappiness that we are having at any one moment is subjectivity, is basically it is not how.
Mm-hmm.
It is I am. You know how we saw I am not being myself. My problem is my sense of myself is incorrect. My sense of the world is incorrect. I'm caught in a subjective bubble, Swami Dayananda calls it, right? And that this is my suffering. We think suffering is depression, anxiety, anger, all of these various forms of human suffering. We think the suffering is the suffering, don't we?
Well, we take suffering to be based on something real, basically, right?
Right. And we take the experience to be real.
Yeah.
So when with Vedanta, we understand that suffering is subjectivity, being enclosed in subjectivity. So when Hal says that I'm an idiot, and I'm suddenly, what's happened is the pain of my life, the agony of my life, the basis of my psychology is now revealed in all its glory. I don't have to go to a psychoanalytic couch to do this. Life will do it for me. My suffering is exposed every day.
Okay, so what you're saying really is that, see, most people would say, well, if someone insults you, then you have a good reason to be unhappy. But you're saying that even when objectively a situation like that arises and someone insults you, if you react with unhappiness or suffering from that, that is based on your own subjectivity, and that's actually revealing your own psychology or your own psychological weakness or distortion about what's actually going on.
Basically, your basic unhappiness is being revealed.
Okay, because we're basically saying, look, in this kind of example, if I am not insecure, if I know who I am, if I understand what's actually happening, then if someone insults me, even if someone says I'm stupid or whatever, I know I'm not stupid, so it really doesn't bother me. Instead, I see that they're saying something like that because of their own subjectivity, because of their own psychology, and because of their own suffering. But that is them. It's not me. Right? Okay.
So what's important here is this. We have to be ruthless on this, Hal. We're not going to get any benefit from Karma Yoga unless we're ruthless on this. no form of unhappiness is justified. What we have to understand what unhappiness is, and unhappiness is that I am enclosed in subjectivity. My unhappiness is subjectivity. I am being something other than a conscious being related to the whole. So my problem is I'm not being myself. But the problem in terms of karma yoga is that I am suffering from subjectivity. Now, if once I understand I'm suffering from subjectivity, is the solution to subjectivity telling Hal that he's also a bit of a bloody idiot?
No.
Why not? Is that going?
That's just a reaction coming out of subjectivity.
Quite.
If you were to do that and return insult with insult and so on, that's just because you're reacting out of subjectivity to a stimulus.
So I'm not seeing that my problem is subjectivity, am I?
No.
You know, now, until I can understand and appreciate that my life, my suffering, my daily sufferings, which is revealed all the time, is centered on me and is subjectivity, if I really appreciate, here's my subject, here is, I'm no longer living in the world of reality or Ishvara's world, I'm living in my own world. Once again, here I am living in my own world. If I really see that that's the problem, that I'm disconnected from the whole, right? If I really see that, what direction am I going to go? If I see that my problem is subjectivity, what is the only solution to subjectivity?
Well, objectivity, I guess.
Quite. And as we've said, objectivity is when the presence of reality is invited and in my life taking up all the room. When I am connected and I am connected to the whole, and when I'm being objective, I'm also being happy.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, let me go back for a minute, because you said we have to be ruthless about this, and I think maybe some people, maybe me, maybe some people don't like that word ruthless. Don't like that word ruthless necessarily.
I said it for effect.
Okay, I think what you mean though is it's a good point though. You have to really be clear on this issue, and in a certain way take a stand and hold yourself to that clarity if you're going to get anywhere with this. It doesn't mean being ruthless in the sense of being angry, aggressive, or anything like that. Just being really clear about what we're just talking about, that unhappiness comes from subjectivity, from a lack of objectivity, from not appreciating actually that whatever we're encountering is the presence of Ishvara in our lives, is the presence of the giver. The given is the presence of the giver.
Yes.
When we don't see that, that's the only reason that we really experience unhappiness with circumstances.
Yes. As an individual, the basis of my unhappiness as an individual is my disconnection from what is.
Yeah.
It is not my mind, other people, or the world.
Right. But then this is really a matter of clarity and understanding. In other words, if one does start experiencing suffering, it doesn't mean you're supposed to get angry at yourself or kick yourself or beat yourself up for it. It's just supposed to be, or could be, a signpost that somewhere along the line you lost your objectivity, right?
We're actually going to use suffering as the signpost. We are no longer living in the world of reality. We're living in our own world.
Okay.
This is so important, Hal, because, and also unless we understand that the presence of reality is always here. And you see, what the Indians say this is that when this connection, abiding in the appreciation of our connection to the whole, of being related to the presence of reality or the presence of God or whatever you want to call it, that is devotion. And that devotion frees you from passion for objects.
Could you say that again? How did you just define devotion?
So our appreciation of our relationship to the whole, which can only happen right here, right now, as I am.
Yes.
That abiding in that appreciation is what makes me what the Indians call it, a devotee.
Okay.
And that devotion...
Because basically, can I just say, I know we pretty much aren't using Sanskrit terminology in these discussions so that they're really accessible to everyone. But I think just to say that that's because basically when we have that sort of devotion, that sort of appreciation to the objective reality that's actually occurring, we're being in relation with what they call Ishwara Shrishti, or the creation of Ishwara, of the Lord, which means the actual objective reality that's actually here, what's real in creation.
We're living in God. Yes.
Yeah, we're living in God. We're living in relation to God, and when, however, we are unhappy and subjective, we're really only involved with what we call the Jiva Shrishti, or the individual's creation, or what they call Pratibhasika.
Yes.
Which is just the subjective view of things that's out of touch, really, with the objective reality.
Quite.
Right? Okay.
Quite. And the other thing too is that when we understand and appreciate that the source of happiness and well-being is the fact that when I pause and I invite the presence of reality into my life, and it takes up all the room, I become what they call a conscious individual in relation to the whole.
Conscious individual and a devotee.
That's right. I'm devoted simply because this is a source of well-being and happiness that is not dependent on people or things. This is rock solid. This is always available to me.
Right, I see. Yeah, there's a kind of a devotion and even a kind of a love or happiness that comes from the happiness of being related to and connecting with the objective reality.
The presence of reality in yes, that's right. By being related to the presence of reality, by inviting it into your life, because you see, when we discover the fact practically that whenever we just simply invite the presence, when we come to understand and alive to the fact of what the presence of reality is in relation to us, and we understand its relationship between that, our connection to that reality, or our relationship to that reality, and our happiness, we find ourselves being devoted. We love that because we as an individual feel first of all, we find ourselves being aware, we find ourselves being conscious, we find ourselves just simply being ourselves, being aware, and being full as a conscious individual. Right?
Yeah.
This is the source of as an individual, this is how we are happy.
Okay. But let me ask you something, which is, might be occurring to some people listening to this. Yes, when we're being objective and we're no longer caught in our subjective perspective on things, when we're devoted to the objectivity or the objective reality then we can just be simply ourselves, and there's a kind of a happiness there. But it does seem, though, that sometimes circumstances are really difficult. I mean, right now, there's a lot of chaos and violence going on in the world. There's a lot of terrible things happen. If you news at all, you can't help but see that. So how do you respond to that?
Okay, so that if sugar is placed beside curry, does it cease to be sweet?
No.
Do we deny the fact that, well, not curry, I mean what's that really hot stuff the Indians love? I hated it.
Chili.
Chili. Okay. You see, the thing is this. This is when I first heard that statement, there is no reason for grief. It sounds outrageous. We get upset. I got upset about it. I thought, this is so ruthless. This is not right. What about all the suffering? You see, I always had the idea that there was always good reasons for suffering.
Sure. And look at the context even in the Gita. That really drives it home, because in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is just about to go to war, and he's going to have to kill members of his family, some of his teachers. It's quite a terrible situation he's facing, yet Krishna is telling him there is no reason for grief.
What it says is
in some ways we're all
that a wise person never grieves.
Right.
Now that means
in some ways we're all in that situation, right? We're all facing very difficult circumstances in some way or another. Yet we're being told there's no reason, if we're wise, there's no reason for grief.
Yeah, but in actual fact, what the teaching really says is that that a wise person is happy.
Yeah.
You see, it's not like because of the nature of what we are, we can't help but be that. Now, we're not talking about that so far right now. That's moksha. But we're talking about, as an individual living in this world, we're talking about a practice that resolves the unhappiness, by being objective, by being related to the whole. And it can only happen right now, right here, as I am.
Okay.
So irrespective of what's happening in the world or whatever, there is a practice here that the moment I see that I am being subjective, right here, right now, as I am, right there is where the practice of karma yoga is.
Okay.
It's not, I'm going to do something so that one day I'm going to feel better. Or one day I'm going to become dispassionate. It is, I'm going to discover dispassion here. I have to neutralize the desire. And because the desire has taken on the form of an unhappiness, if I resolve the unhappiness, the binding desire no longer has a hold on me.
Okay.
But the only way that I can resolve the subjectivity, and the unhappiness is now understood to be subjectivity, caught in my own world.
Yeah.
So right here, right now, as I am, if I pause and I invite the presence of reality in, it takes up all the room, as we've discussed. The suffering individual, the suffering Bede, who I know extremely well, Hal, right there and then, he disappears. Swami Dayananda calls this the resolution of the ego into Ishvara.
Okay.
And without this, there is no karma yoga.
Okay. Well, what is this, like an act of will, or how does this work?
No. So basically, first of all, unless I understand and appreciate what it means to be in relation to the presence of reality or the presence of God, I can't practice karma yoga.
Okay.
Because you see, what happens is this, is that when I become familiar with that relation to the whole, then I can see that, yes, when I am in relation to reality, I in myself, I am simply, first of all, being myself as a simple conscious being. I'm being conscious and I have a relative fullness and well-being.
Yes.
And because I understand that now, I have a juxtaposition, don't I? Between when I'm living in my world and living in the world of reality.
Right.
And the practice of yoga is, in my daily life, a shifting from living in my world to living in Ishvara's world. That's simply, if to put it simply, that's what the practice of karma yoga is on a daily basis.
Okay. And now you could see that devotion from that would also come from because you see that it actually works, right?
We only love it.
That it actually makes you happy.
That's the only thing that's ever going to. It's interesting how the meaning of the word Krishna is joy.
Mm-hmm.
You see, the thing is that the only thing that's going to resolve our suffering is the discovery of happiness, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
When we're talking about karma yoga, we're talking about ourselves as an individual. We're not talking about the total resolution. We're talking about just simply the neutralizing of desires. And you see,
which will make us more available to the actual understanding, the more profound understanding that brings the total resolution, right?
yeah, because you see, when I'm in relation to the whole, I am aware of myself as a conscious individual. Then the question of, well, what is the content of this conscious individual? Then it becomes meaningful. But you see, so what happens is that we are basically going to convert our daily living into a way of life in which we neutralize the binding desires.
Okay, I see.
But it's not possible unless we first of all understand what it is to be related to God or to reality. Because we then won't really be able to see that my problem is I'm not related to, at any one moment when I am unhappy, I have ceased to be wise. That's true. But I am not a devotee. I am lost in my own will. I'm something else other than being a devotee.
Right.
Does that make sense? And
yeah.
You see, one of the hardest things with this is this. And when I started with this, it was extremely difficult for me because I thought, okay, whether I like it or not, every form of unhappiness that occurs to me is an indication, a red flag. It says, Bede, you are now lost in your own little world. It is not my wife. It is not the circumstances that I'm in. It's not even my so-called psychological problems. Is that I have ceased to be myself as a conscious person, and I am lost in a sense of identity. I am lonely, I am sad, I am angry, I am confused, I'm just empty, I'm all of those things. You're familiar with all of those things?
Sure, I think we all are, yeah.
So this is subjectivity. The problem is subjectivity. Now, when I understand that, we need to see what it means to. Have you ever heard of the expression graceful acceptance?
Yes.
Now, graceful acceptance is why graceful acceptance is important. Is that when we understand that everything that's occurring, which we've discussed, is perfectly in order. It's the presence of God in the form of order, or presence of reality in the form of the intelligent order. Basically what happens is, instead of being a resistor and a fighter and a reactor, we become an open receiver.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Now, it's a very interesting thing to become a graceful receiver right in the middle of an argument, Hal. Okay, it's a very interesting thing, because what happens is that daily life in our past has impacted against us. Is that agreed? We've received experiences, we've received effects from other people, haven't we? People have hurt us.
Yeah.
We have grievances about life, haven't we?
Mm-hmm.
We've got grievances where people have not treated us well, where they've hurt us, where events have not gone well. So we've been on the receiving end, if you like.
Yeah.
And our whole psychological history is this history of being on the receiving end of the actions of other people and the actions of circumstances. Would that be true?
That's how we feel anyway, yeah.
That's how we feel. So there's implicit in this a deep sense of victimization, isn't there?
Sure, yeah.
And hence this blame.
Mm-hmm. Blame and resentment, yeah.
Yes. Enmity.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've been hurt, Swami Dayananda said, because we've been hurt, we want to hurt back. He said the basis of our psychology is hurt.
Right, right.
And what happens is, whenever a person says or does something to you that you don't know, or says something to you that you haven't, that you don't like, what happens is that is associated with every memory that's similar. And we find ourselves resuscitating having the experience of being hurt.
Yeah, it triggers our past experiences or our memories of them of being hurt. Yeah.
Yes. And so what happens is that when people do things to us or hurt things to us, we know what that means to us personally, don't we?
Yeah.
Now, remember when we were talking about the fact that context determines the meaning?
Uh-huh.
So in the context, sorry?
Last time we talked about that.
Last time we talked about it, when I talked to you about, like, if a guy was ripping open a guy's belly with a knife, it sounds fairly bad, but when we actually understand that he's a young surgeon doing it under enemy fire, the whole meaning changes.
Right.
Now, now, unless there's a transformation of meaning of our daily experiences,
mm-hmm.
we cannot help but get caught up in reaction.
I see, yeah.
We can't help it. Now, right. And this attitude of resistance to life has been formed in us by our past experiences, hasn't it?
Yeah.
But the attitude of graceful acceptance is actually born out of our understanding of the presence of God. It's not a result of the past.
Born out of an understanding of our presence of God, or out of a kind of intelligent order to what's coming. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the presence of reality in the form of intelligent order. And because we understand that, we find ourselves willing to gracefully receive what is happening.
Even when those things seem to be challenging or difficult, right?
Well, they might be difficult and unpleasant.
Yeah.
He makes a distinction between that in one of his books called the Freedom from Sadness. That it might be unpleasant. We're not denying unpleasantness.
Okay.
Our suffering, when we become a suffering person in relation to that problem is mine.
Okay.
But when, you see, if I'm actually abiding in graceful acceptance, it's not possible for me to be psychologically unhappy. It's not possible.
Okay.
Because the fundamental human psychology is the psychology of conflict, isn't it? I don't like that. I'm in friction with myself. I'm in friction with other people, and I'm in friction with the world. Is that true?
That seems to be pretty fundamental, yeah.
So even when I'm me as an angry person, I'm in friction, aren't I, with somebody?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Me as a sad and depressed person, I'm in friction, aren't I?
Yes.
Me who's confused, I'm in friction with what I can't understand.
Right.
Me, this experience of myself as a resisting person has many forms, doesn't it?
Sure.
But now this is what Swami Dayananda says, attitude is the individual. When I am being accepting and I'm abiding in that acceptance, I'm being accepting, what happens to the friction?
It's not there.
It's just not there. And not only that, because my whole mind is full of the presence of reality, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, I also might dislike what I'm experiencing, but I'm not in friction with that either. So
Okay.
we're not trying not to react. We're basically we have an attitude of graceful acceptance which embraces everything, including my reactions to everything. So what happens is Hal calls me an idiot. I'm upset. I accept the fact. I go into a relation. I shift into a relation where I gracefully accept the fact, yes, Hal has called me an idiot, and I don't like it. I even have an impulse to hit him back.
Mm-hmm.
But all of those reactions, have I got control over any of those reactions?
Not over those impulses or reactions.
No. The unfolding.
Not over their existence, only whether you act upon them or not, right?
Yes, but not only that,
mm-hmm.
That I can remain in an attitude of graceful acceptance to whatever happens.
Okay.
I can make room for whatever happens. So we're not talking about being a nice person here.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking about I'm not going to react.
Right.
So I'm not setting up an ideal about how I should react and how other people should be or any of that stuff. I'm having the basis is I'm leaving that in the hands of the order.
I see.
But I am making room for everything that's happening. So there's no suppression, there's no resistance, there's no repression, there's no trying to be nice, any of this stuff. But and when I am being gracefully accepting, I've invited the presence of reality into my life.
Right.
And the basis of my life, this one attitude of graceful acceptance is based on awareness and discrimination. It's not based on my psychology. So it lifts me out of my psychological reactions. This is the beauty of it.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now let's get to some grass tacks here. So here I am, I'm walking down the road, and I find myself I'd suddenly notice I'm just slightly unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now it's a very interesting thing that once we've become familiar with what it is to be in relation to the presence of reality, we go, oh, so we recognize it, don't we?
Yeah.
That this is a happening that's happening. I'm unhappy in some way.
Right.
Now, it's not psychological. We're not talking about psychological acceptance here. I'll accept myself because that might make the feeling go away. It's not like that. Okay. What I do is I simply pause, and I pause and I shift back into this attitude, which is the vision of reality lived, isn't it? This attitude is the vision of reality embodied. And it can be a refuge for me. I can shift into it. So I find myself shifting into it. I just relax. I just simply let what is there be there with the understanding, including the yucky feeling. Because when I was unhappy, I was unhappy, wasn't I?
Yeah.
I found myself being unhappy.
Right.
But when I shift into graceful acceptance, the unhappy reaction might be that tends to go away, but that may or may not be there, just like the fact of the trees and the road I'm walking down and the fact of my emotion. They're just simply facts, aren't they?
Yeah.
So I shift into receiving, gracefully receiving what is happening.
Okay, yeah, I understand. So then the individual, in a sense, resolves into the reality or the totality of whatever is being experienced. Right?
The isolated individual disappears. Myself as an isolated, cut-off individual disappears.
Okay, the isolated, cut off, resisting individual disappears because you've actually, in some sense, opened yourself to what is.
Yeah, and now I'm a devotee. I'm related to the whole, and I find myself no longer bound.
Okay.
Okay, so I don't have. You see, what used to happen to me? How I had this kind of a binding desire. I really want to. I want to be happy.
Yeah.
I want to be happy. And then when I noticed that I wasn't, I'd be disturbed. Does that make sense?
Of course, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now the area is not wanting to be happy. It is just simply the appreciation that when I am in relation to the whole, I am happy.
I see. Okay.
I'm not doing psychological meddling here.
Right.
I don't need to.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, it's pretty easy to do that when you're walking down the road and you're a little bit disgruntled, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Now, fundamentally, we need to be able to resolve our enmity towards other human beings. Would you say that's true?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's because we've been hurt, we have a desire to hurt.
Yeah, that is such a major source of unhappiness and
it's just yes, it is a major thing that when you basically know that when you are engaging in any form of attacking, any form of feeling of enmity and hatred, the basis of that is not the person. The basis of that is the hurt that you have in your life, the accumulated hurt.
Right.
Now, this is where this whole thing becomes very inspiring, really. You see, Swami Dayananda talks in his meditations about how we resolve the past in the present. We resolve the past in the present. Now, when I have a demand that people treat me well and treat me with respect and treat me this way and that way, when I have a binding desire in that regard, I am constantly, it's been constantly frustrated, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because human beings are going to act the way they act.
Right. Right. They're
going to the way they act. And that every experience I'm having, and when I think of the past experiences, have you ever sometimes thought of past experiences and felt sad? That the feeling of sadness still exists today when you think about it?
Yes.
So what happens is this. All of those experiences hang together in your mind like they've accumulated, but they're all built around with the desire to be treated well by other people, isn't it? For other people to treat me well and give me happiness.
Right.
Does that make sense? Now, what happens is when that binding desire in this present moment is resolved, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I actually understand that people actually can't hurt me. What hurts me is actually being cut off from the whole.
Right.
What do you think happens to that heavy weight of the psychological past of being rejected?
Oh, well, that goes away, or it's not there.
That's right. You see, what Swami Dayananda says, we've got so many grievances, we have to put them all in one basket. He talks about Ishvara.
Okay.
See, so basically, once we understand that our problem is fundamentally being alienated and disconnected from the whole.
Right.
And we understand that all suffering is that disconnection, is that subjectivity.
Yes.
And then when we suddenly find ourselves, have you ever found yourself having an argument with someone you're close to?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When we're practicing karma yoga, right there and then, the first thing we can do is we can just simply pause. That's all I do, is I just pause. I pause. But what's wonderful is this. You only pause because you've recognized, here's my suffering again being revealed to me. Here's my isolation being revealed to me. This is a completely new way of seeing something.
Right.
See, the moment before, I'd forgotten and I was fighting my wife and thinking it was her problem.
Yes. Uh-huh.
But now I've actually recognized, haven't I, that right here, right now, as I am a suffering individual, and I'm suffering from subjectivity, which is disconnection from the presence of God or presence of reality.
Yes.
So what do I instantly do? I go into graceful acceptance, don't I? Because I understand that I have to invite the given in.
Okay.
I have to gracefully receive the given.
Right.
Which is the presence of the giver.
Yes.
So right now,
go. Yeah. You can do that with respect to what's happening right now. You can also do that, as you were mentioning, with respect to what's happened in the past, right?
Yes, Swami Dayananda talks about that. You bring to mind, when the seat of meditation, you bring to your mind these past events and you look at them from this understanding, in the light of this understanding. Because in the light of this understanding, they will resolve.
Okay, yeah, because many of us, we carry this big burden around, like a big sack of unhappiness on our back based on our past, don't we?
Yes, and that is constantly being resuscitated by present interactions with people.
Exactly.
But we don't recognize that. We think it's the people.
Yeah.
And we're experiencing ourselves as the victim of those people.
Right.
But when we shift into...
So you're saying if we resolve that sadness and resentment with respect to the past, we're also less likely then to react in that way in the present, right?
Well, what happens is that the practice of karma yoga unburdens all of this. Simply because, you see, yourself as a conscious being is not a sociological, psychological product.
Right.
It wasn't produced by historical forces.
I see. So you become unburdened from all those so-called historical forces, right?
Yes, because...
And you're able then to be fully present and receptive to what is.
If I discover that I'm a simple conscious being and not a victim right now, today, you're giving me a hard time, that discovery applies to everything in the past as well. That's what really... See, the starting point of freedom is being ourselves as a simple conscious being related to the whole.
Right.
Because this is not a product of what happened between myself and my mother, my father. It's not a product of none of that, in fact. And also, I'm no longer being the victim that suffered from all of those things.
Right. Okay. Well, this is very helpful.
and it's extremely helpful because, you see, when we practice karma yoga, because we talk about, performance of action with proper attitude.
Yes.
You see, proper means property, ownership, what belongs to. You see, we're talking about an attitude that belongs to this vision of the reality.
Okay.
So when we live our life, daily live our life, we're talking about the receiving. Next time we're going to go and talk about doing, but we're talking about, basically we cannot, in order to be able to respond to what's happening in front of us, we have to see what's happening in front of us.
Okay.
When we're caught up in subjectivity, we're not seeing. We're not living, actually, Dayananda would say. We're no longer alive to facts.
Right. So what we're talking about here is this is all now we're going into, which we'll get into next time, a transition that will allow us then to do what's called do dharma, or do the right thing in response to what's happening.
Yeah,
right?
Without graceful acceptance is the ground of everything.
Yeah.
And graceful acceptance is the vision that everything here is the functioning order. Does that make sense? The presence of God in the form of this order. Because then I am different. I am willing to receive whatever is happening gracefully. Do you see what I mean? Because I understand that when I actually receive without reservation what is happening, everything that is happening, what happens is I'm transformed as an individual. I become conscious as an individual. Implicitly, because the presence of reality now fills my mind. When the presence of reality is not filling my mind, does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's not appreciated as it is. I am not conscious in a sense.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does make sense. Yeah, it's great.
So what happens is that when we look at our daily life, we can't justify unhappiness.
Okay.
This is so important. This makes a tremendous difference to us when we know that right here, right now, as I am, if I notice I'm being unhappy, I have to first of all see it in the light of the vision of reality, in the vision, this vision of Ishvara or reality or God. And then what I do is I find my way, like what you said the other day, a beautiful phrase, I find my way back home.
Okay.
And I find my way back home in front of my wife who I'm having an argument with. I find my way back home when I find myself being an enmity towards other people. And we have to accept that fact. We human beings, because we've hurt, we have desires to hurt back. And we get a satisfaction of satisfying those desires. There's certain honesty about this. Because we can be honest now, because this just is the way things work. Given hurt, you want to hurt.
Yeah.
So we don't go into self-condemnation, but what we're talking about is we're talking about establishing our life, a lifestyle, where we live in relation to reality through living in graceful acceptance, through abiding in graceful acceptance.
Okay.
And that's what transforms us psychologically as an individual. Because what Swami Dayananda says, the individual is the attitude. So when I am being gracefully accepting, which is born out of the vision, right here, right now, as I am, I'm transformed as an individual, and I'm free of the burden of my psychological past. Also, because I'm free of the misery, right here, right now, as I am, I've neutralized the binding desire that was active in me right here, right now, as I am.
Okay, right. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty clear how that works. So the big takeaway, I guess, from this conversation is, as you said, and you've said a few times, is when you find yourself being unhappy, in a way that's a red flag that you're caught in subjectivity. You can use that as a cue to help you find your way home back to graceful acceptance, back to a devotional relationship with the intelligent order of reality, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
so you could see that when you're unhappy and frustrated and angry, you've kind of lost that vision. You've lost that relationship of you, the conscious being, in relation with the intelligent totality.
Yes.
Right?
When you're subjective, you're not alive to facts.
You're not. You're not. Right. When you're unhappy like that, then you're not being alive to facts. You can take that for granted.
And Swami Dayananda says, and also you're not living.
And you're not really fully alive either, right?
You're not living.
So you need to kind of pause for a minute.
Yes.
And reconnect in a certain sense with this vision. Yeah?
That's very good, Hal. What happens is we first of all recognize it, and then we reorientate again, and we reestablish ourselves in it. We recognize when we've gone away, we reorientate our attention, we establish ourselves in it. So every time we notice we're no longer home, which, by the way, when you start doing this, you notice that all the time.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that if we continue to justify our unhappiness, of course I'm unhappy. Anyone would be unhappy. I'm furious about this. I don't like that. All of that stuff. Then the benefits it's not possible to neutralize our binding desires, and so what happens is, like what my Swamini said, we have a passion for objects, and that passion remains the same because we never resolve the unhappiness that makes those objects so important to us. And this is it's just not possible to change psychologically without the practice of karma yoga, and it's not possible to understand the practice of karma yoga without understanding what Ishvara is and how to come into relation to him or to this reality.
Okay. Yeah, that's clear.
Okay.
Great. Very good. So I think we all have our homework for between now and our next discussion.
Yes.
It's inspiring and maybe challenging, but also inspiring because it shows a way forward, right?
For me, this was the most magnificent discovery in my entire life, to tell you the truth. I mean, I find Swami Dayananda's vision of God, the relationship of karma yoga, how it frees us from subjectivity. I find it the most extraordinary. I find it absolutely extraordinary. I knew that as an individual, what's important is the receiving of impacts and also the giving out of impacts. And unless there's a transformation in the way we receive and also in the way we do, it's not possible to to understand and appreciate what happiness is in the real sense. Because all unhappiness, this is the basic thing of Vedanta, is me being something other than I am. And at the level of karma yoga, what I am is a conscious individual who's related to the whole. And therefore, when I'm being myself in front of events, I am being myself, I'm being aware, and I'm being full. When I'm caught up in subjectivity, I'm being an unhappy person. And I'm being other than what I am. And so karma yoga is why I wanted to stress it. Unless it is appreciated for what it is, and unless it's put into practice, we will not neutralize these binding desires that bind us and keep our life fixed the way it's always been.
Right.
Okay?
Very good. Thank you, Bede.
Okay, Hal. Bye-bye.
See you next time.
Yeah.